The fire crackled before us, casting dancing shadows on the surrounding trees. The night air was filled with smoke and mystery, and I could feel everyone's eyes fixed on me, eager for the story I was about to share. I took a deep breath, letting the memories of those dark days flood my mind once again. It was the summer of 1967, I began, my voice low and serious. I was young, naive and desperate for answers that the conventional world seemed unable to provide. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how I almost lost my soul to the reptilian sect. I paused, observing the puzzled expressions around me. The wind whispered among the leaves, as if even nature was paying attention to my narrative. It all started with a flyer, a simple piece of paper that promised enlightenment and cosmic truth. I found it stuck to the windshield of my car after a long day at the library in San Francisco. The words on it seemed to leap off the page, speaking directly to my restless soul. Discover the hidden truth. Join us and transcend. I shook my head, a bitter smile on my lips. If I knew then what I know now, but ignorance is bliss, isn't it? And I was hungry for knowledge, for a connection with something greater than myself. The address on the flyer took me to an old convent in the hills of California. I vividly remember the feeling of awe and apprehension that enveloped me when I saw that imposing structure for the first time. The grey stone walls rose against the blue sky, Gothic windows reflecting the setting sun like watchful eyes. My listeners leaned closer, captured by the atmosphere I was painting with my words. As I approached the wrought iron gates, I was greeted by a group of people dressed in white. Their faces were serene, their eyes shining with a light I couldn't fully understand. A woman, who I later found out was called Evelyn, stepped forward, her smile warm and welcoming. "Welcome, seeker," she said, her voice silky smooth. "You have come to the home of the enlightened ones." I paused, letting the tension build before continuing. At that moment, I felt as if I had finally found my place in the world. The feeling of belonging was so strong, so intoxicating, that I completely ignored the shiver that ran down my spine when the gates closed behind me with a metallic clang. I was guided through stone corridors, the air heavy with the smell of incense and something else, something I couldn't identify at the time, but which I now recognize as the acrid smell of fear. The walls were decorated with intricate tapestries depicting scenes that mixed ancient mythology and images that seemed straight out of a scientific nightmare. Reptilian beings emerging from spaceships, manipulating human evolution. In the great hall, dozens of people were gathered, all with the same bright eyes and serene smiles. And there, at the center of it all, was him, Jonathan. My voice shook slightly as I pronounced that name, and I saw several of my listeners fidget uncomfortably. Jonathan was the leader of the sect, although back then they referred to themselves as a spiritual community. Tall with gray hair and piercing blue eyes, he emanated an aura of power and knowledge that was almost palpable. When he began to speak, his voice resounded through the hall, enveloping us like a comforting blanket. He spoke about the secrets of the universe, about alien races that had been watching us for millennia, about the limitless potential of the human mind. Every word seemed to connect directly with my deepest being, answering questions I didn't even know I had. "We are the chosen ones," he proclaimed, his arms raised dramatically, destined to bridge the gap between humanity and our cosmic brothers. "The reptilians await us, ready to guide us to the next stage of our evolution." I shook my head, remembering my own naivety. I drank up every word as if it were water in the desert. That night, I took part in my first ritual, a ceremony they called the awakening of the inner serpent. We were taken to an underground chamber, the walls covered in strange symbols that seemed to move in the flickering candlelight. The air was thick with the smoke of exotic herbs, and hypnotic music pulsed in a rhythm that seemed to match the beats of my heart. Jonathan led us in a meditation, his voice taking us deeper and deeper into our own minds. "Feel the primordial energy moving within you," he intoned. "Let the ancient wisdom of the reptilians flow through your bodies." And then it happened. My voice dropped to almost a whisper, forcing everyone to lean forward even more. I felt something moving inside me, as if my bones were rearranging themselves, my skin about to split. For a terrifying moment, I was sure I was transforming, evolving into something beyond human. When I opened my eyes, I saw the others around me in various states of ecstasy and terror. Some were crying, others laughing hysterically. And Jonathan was there, moving between us, touching our foreheads and murmuring words of encouragement. His eyes met mine, and in that instant, I felt as if he could see into my soul. "You're special, Sarah," he said, his voice reverberating in my mind. "You have a crucial role to play in our great mission." I paused, letting my words hang in the night air. The fire crackled, throwing sparks into the starry sky. That night, lying in my new bed in the communal dormitory, I was certain that I had found my destiny. Little did I know that I was just starting down a path that would lead me to the depths of horror and madness. I looked at the faces around me, seeing the fear and fascination in their eyes. "But that," I said with a grim smile, "is only the beginning of the story. The real terror was yet to come." The silence that followed my initial account was broken only by the crackling of the fire. I could see in my listeners' eyes that they were caught up in the story, eager for more. I took a sip of water, moistening my dry throat before continuing. The days that followed that first night were a dizzying mix of ecstasy and confusion. I began, my voice laden with bitter memories. Each morning began with meditation at sunrise, our minds being guided by Jonathan through cosmic labyrinths that he claimed connected us with our reptilian mentors. I closed my eyes for a moment, reliving those sensations. It was intoxicating. The feeling of being part of something bigger, of being on the verge of a cosmic revelation. But there were moments, brief flashes of lucidity, when I questioned everything. It was during one of these morning sessions that I noticed Ethan for the first time. He was sitting in the far corner of the meditation hall, his restless eyes and tense posture at odds with the apparent serenity of the other members. Our gazes met for a moment, and I saw in him a reflection of my own growing skepticism. After the session, as the others dispersed to their daily tasks, Ethan approached me. "You're new here, aren't you?" he whispered, his eyes constantly checking to see if anyone was watching us. "Be careful, not everything is what it seems." Before I could reply, Evelyn appeared at my side, her placid smile masking a tension I only realized much later. "I see you've met our Ethan," she said, her voice sweet but with a hint of warning. "He sometimes has trouble tuning into our higher frequencies." Ethan walked away quickly, leaving me with a feeling of unease that I tried to ignore. After all, I was there to find answers, not to doubt, right? I paused, observing the attentive expressions around me. The wind had picked up, making the flames of the campfire dance frantically, casting unsettling shadows. The following weeks were a whirlwind of increasingly intense teachings and rituals. Jonathan would talk for hours about the secret history of the Earth, about how the reptilians had guided human evolution for millennia, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. "We are on the verge of a new era," he proclaimed, his eyes shining with a fervor that bordered on madness. "And you, my dears, are the catalysts for this transformation." We were subjected to long purification sessions, which consisted of fasting, sleep deprivation, and what Jonathan called reptilian regression therapy. Lying in dark rooms, we were induced into altered states of consciousness through a combination of hypnosis techniques and, well, now I know it was hallucinogenic drugs. My voice shook slightly as I continued. During those sessions, I saw things, scaly creatures emerging from the shadows, their claws extended towards me, alien cities pulsing with a strange, threatening energy, and always, the feeling that something was squirming under my skin, wanting to get out. But the worst were the whispers. Voices that weren't mine, weren't human, whispering promises of power and knowledge, if only I gave myself over completely. After each session, we were gathered together to share our visions. Jonathan listened attentively, his eyes shining in a way that I now recognize as pure greed and manipulation. He interpreted our induced hallucinations as messages from the reptilian masters, reinforcing our belief in their twisted doctrine. It was during one of these meetings that I first noticed the absences. Faces that I had known for the first few weeks simply disappeared. When I asked about them, I received only enigmatic smiles and vague answers about ascension and special missions. My restlessness grew, but it was drowned out by a mixture of exhaustion, confusion, and a desperate desire to believe that it all had a greater purpose. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to explore the complex. The corridors were silent, lit only by the moonlight seeping through the narrow windows. That's when I heard that. I paused dramatically, feeling the palpable tension among my listeners. It was a sound I'll never forget. A muffled scream, mixed with something I can only describe as an inhuman hiss. Following the sound, I came to a locked door in the basement of the convent. Through the thick wood, I could hear Jonathan speaking in a language I didn't recognize, his voice alternating between a soft murmur and frantic screams. Terrified, but unable to move away, I pressed my eye against the lock. What I saw in that room haunts me to this day. My voice dropped to almost a whisper, forcing everyone to lean forward. Jonathan was standing in the center of a circle drawn on the floor, strange symbols glowing with a light of their own. Around him, members of the sect were writhing on the ground, their bodies transforming in ways that defy comprehension. Skin tearing to reveal scales, limbs elongating to impossible proportions, eyes. Oh God, those eyes were no longer human. And at the center of it all, towering over Jonathan, was a figure that my mind refuses to accept as real, dull reptilian, with eyes that shone with an ancient and cruel intelligence. It wasn't a hallucination, it wasn't a fantasy, it was real, as real as the terror that froze my blood. I staggered backwards, my scream caught in my throat. In my panic, I bumped into a vase, the sound of ceramics shattering on the stone floor echoing through the corridors. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, I was paralyzed, certain that at any moment the door would open and I would be dragged into that nightmare. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around, ready to fight or flee, only to run into Ethan. His eyes were wide with fear, but his voice was firm as he said, "Run, run now, or you'll never get the chance." I paused, letting the weight of those words hang in the air. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. At that moment, I had to make a choice: stay and face the horror I had witnessed, or flee and abandon everything I had believed in over the past few weeks. The decision I made that night would change the course of my life forever. I looked at the faces around me, seeing the fear and anticipation in their eyes. "But that," I said with a grim smile, "is a story for the next chapter." The silence that followed my account was palpable. I could see the gleam of fear in my listeners' eyes, reflecting the dancing flames of the campfire. I took a moment to gather my thoughts, the memories of that fateful night still vivid in my mind. "The decision to flee," I began, my voice low and intense, "was made in a split second, but its consequences would echo throughout my life. Ethan and I ran through the dark corridors of the convent, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. Every shadow seemed to hide a danger, every corner a trap about to close. The distant sound of chanting and shouting pursued us, increasing our urgency. "This way," Ethan whispered, guiding me down a narrow passage I'd never noticed before. "There's an emergency exit that they keep hidden. It's our only chance." As we ran, Ethan spoke in broken sentences, revealing pieces of a truth even more sinister than I could have imagined. "They're not what they seem, Sarah," he gasped. "Jonathan, he made a pact. Something ancient, something evil." Before I could process his words, a shrill alarm cut through the air. Excited voices echoed through the corridors, and the sound of hurried footsteps approached from all directions. Finally, we came to a small metal door, almost invisible in the stone wall. Ethan opened it with a visible effort, revealing a narrow, dark passage. "Go," He pushed me. "I'll slow you down." "No," I protested, grabbing his arm. "Come with me." The look Ethan gave me at that moment will remain etched in my memory forever. It was a mixture of fear, determination, and something else. Something that only now, years later, I can identify as a deep regret. "I can't," he said, his voice breaking. They have something of mine, something I can't let go of, but you still have a chance. Go, find help, expose it all." With one last push, Ethan forced me down the passage and closed the door behind me. The metallic sound echoed in the dark tunnel, sealing my fate. I paused, observing the tense expressions around me. The wind had picked up, howling through the trees like a distant wail. The tunnel was a claustrophobic nightmare, dark, damp, and narrow, forcing me to advance in a half-crouch. Every step was a battle against rising panic, every breath an effort against the stale air. I don't know how long I advanced in that darkness. Minutes or hours, my perception of time was completely distorted. At some point, I began to hear things, whispers in the shadows, scratches on the walls, and always, the feeling of being watched, pursued. When I finally emerged from the tunnel, the full moon bathed the landscape in a spectral light. I found myself in the middle of a dense forest, the branches of the trees twitching like bony fingers against the night sky. Exhausted, disoriented, and terrified, I began to run. Branches whipped my face. Roots threatened to trip me up with every step. But the real horror was behind me, so I kept going, driven by sheer survival instinct. That's when I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold in my veins. A roar. No, not a roar. A hiss. A monstrous hiss that couldn't have come from any known land creature. I looked back and, oh God, my voice faltered for a moment, the memory still too fresh. Something was moving between the trees. Something big, dark, and definitely not human. Its scales shone in the moonlight. Its eyes were like burning coals in the night. Terror gave me a new surge of energy. I ran like I'd never run before, my lungs burning, my muscles screaming in protest. Branches and stones cut my bare feet, but I hardly felt the pain. All that mattered was getting away from the thing that was chasing me. I don't know how long I ran. At some point, I tripped and fell, rolling down a steep ravine. When I finally stopped, I was semi-conscious, covered in mud and leaves. Above me, I could hear the sound of the creature approaching, its hiss now a low, menacing purr. I closed my eyes, certain that my end had come. Then I heard another sound. A sound I never thought I'd be so happy to hear. Sirens. Headlights cut through the darkness, and human voices echoed through the forest. The creature, whatever it was, let out one last hiss of frustration before disappearing into the night. Moments later, I was found by a search party. Apparently, my family had noticed my disappearance and alerted the authorities. As I was being carried out of the forest, I looked back one last time. For an instant, I thought I saw a tall, scaly figure watching from afar, its eyes shining with an evil intelligence. But when I blinked, it was gone. I paused, letting the weight of the silence settle in. The fire crackled low now, the shadows seeming to lengthen around us. The days that followed were a blur of police interrogations, medical examinations, and therapy sessions. I told my story several times, but few believed me. The police investigated the convent, of course, but when they got there, they found only an empty building. No sign of Jonathan, the other members, or any suspicious activity. Ethan. Ethan was never found. Sometimes I wonder if he really existed, or if he was just a creation of my tormented mind. But then I remember the look in his eyes that last night, and I know he was real and probably lost forever. The authorities concluded that I had been the victim of a manipulative cult, but dismissed my stories about reptilian creatures as hallucinations induced by drugs and stress. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was all just an elaborate nightmare. But on the darkest nights, when the wind howls and the shadows seem to take on a life of their own, I remember. I remember Jonathan's eyes shining with an unholy knowledge. I remember the muffled screams coming from that forbidden room. And I remember, oh how I remember, that creature chasing me through the forest. I looked at the faces around me, seeing the fear, fascination, and doubt in their eyes. You may not believe me. Frankly, sometimes I don't believe it myself. But one thing I know for sure. There are secrets in this world, ancient and terrible secrets, which are best kept hidden. Because once you see them, once you know, you can never go back. And sometimes, on the quietest nights, I swear I can hear a whisper, a distant call. And I wonder, have I really escaped? Or is the reptilian sect still out there, waiting, watching, ready to claim what it considers its own? The silence that followed my narrative was almost palpable. The flames of the campfire had died down, casting restless shadows over the attentive faces around me. I took a sip of water, my throat dry after the intense story. You must be wondering, I began, my voice hoarse. What happened next? How does someone move on after an experience like that? The truth is, you don't. Not completely. I sat up, feeling the weight of the years and the memories. The months following my escape were a blur of intensive therapy, inconclusive police investigations, and sleepless nights. My family tried to understand, to support me, but how to explain the inexplicable? How to make someone understand the terror of being chased by something that shouldn't exist? But the worst thing wasn't the constant fear or the vivid nightmares that woke me up screaming every night. No, the worst thing was the doubt. The doubt that settled in my mind like a parasite, making me question everything I thought I knew about reality. I paused, observing the attentive expressions around me. The wind had calmed down, as if nature itself was listening. It was about a year after my escape that things started to change. At first, they were small things. A glimpse of a scaly figure in the corner of my eye. A low, ominous hiss coming from a dark alley. Things I could easily dismiss as overactive imagination, after effects of trauma. But then the incidents became more frequent, more tangible. One morning, I woke up to find claw marks on my window, outside, on the 4th floor. Another time, I found an iridescent scale on my living room carpet, too big to belong to any known reptile. And the voices, the voices came back, no longer just in my dreams, but whispering in the dark corners of my apartment, calling my name with a disturbing familiarity. Desperate for answers, I started researching. I immersed myself in old books, obscure internet forums, accounts of similar experiences. The more I looked, the more I found. Stories from ancient cultures talking about serpent gods, conspiracy theories about a reptilian race controlling world governments, reports of sightings of creatures that defied human comprehension. It was during this frantic search that I received my first email. No sender, no subject. Just a cryptic message. The serpent never sleeps. The awakening is approaching. I looked at my listeners, seeing the fear and fascination in their eyes. In the months that followed, more messages came. Some were veiled threats, others promises of power and knowledge if I returned to the serpent's embrace. Each one made me more paranoid, more isolated. I moved several times, always looking over my shoulder, always expecting to see those inhuman eyes watching me from the shadows. I cut ties with friends and family, fearing that they might become targets, or worse, that they might be compromised. It was at this time that I began to notice changes in myself. My eyesight became sharper, especially at night. My reflexes became faster, and sometimes, in moments of extreme stress, I would swear I could see patterns in the chaos of the world, invisible connections linking seemingly random events. One night, looking in the mirror, I had the terrible sensation that my eyes had changed. For a fleeting moment, the pupils lengthened, becoming vertical slits. I blinked, and everything returned to normal. But the doubt remained. What had Jonathan and his sect done to me? What was I becoming? I paused, letting the weight of these revelations hang in the air. The fire crackled, throwing sparks into the night sky. It was then that I received the message that would change everything again. An email, different from the others. If you want answers, come to where it all began. The truth waits in the heart of the serpent. Attached was a map that led back to that damned convent in California. I knew it was a trap. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to ignore it, to run away, to hide. But the need to know, to understand, was stronger. Perhaps, I thought, by facing my demons, I could finally free myself from them. So, against all common sense, I packed my bags and left. The journey back was a nightmare of paranoia and anticipation. Every face in the crowd seemed to hide sinister secrets. Every shadow threatened to come to life and swallow me up. When I finally arrived at the convent, the sun was setting, painting the sky blood red. The building was there, imposing as ever, but different. The windows were broken. Weeds grew between the stones. It looked as if it had been abandoned for years. With my heart hammering in my chest, I pushed on the rusty gate. It opened with an ominous groan, as if welcoming an old friend, or warning of imminent danger. Inside was a maze of dark corridors and empty rooms. Dust and cobwebs covered everything, but there was something else. A smell. An acrid smell that reminded me of Jonathan's purification sessions. Following my instincts, or perhaps something more sinister guiding my steps, I arrived in that room. The room where, years before, I had witnessed horrors beyond comprehension. The door was ajar, a thin beam of light escaping through the crack. With trembling hands, I pushed it open. What I saw inside, oh, God. My voice faltered, the memory still too fresh. The room was lit by black candles, their arrangement forming complex symbols on the floor. In the center, there was a stone table, stained red, and on it, I paused, my eyes scanning the tense faces around me. On it was Ethan, or what was left of him. His body was changed. Scales covered parts of his skin, his limbs elongated at impossible angles. His eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling, but they were no longer human. They were the eyes of a reptile. Before I could react, I heard a voice behind me. A voice I knew all too well, one that had haunted my nightmares for years. "Welcome back, Sarah," said Jonathan. "We've been expecting you." I turned around slowly, my body rigid with terror. Jonathan was there, but he was no longer the man I had known. His skin had a greenish sheen, his eyes were vertical slits, and behind him, oh dear. Behind him was the creature, the same one that had chased me in the forest years ago. Tall reptilian, its eyes glowing with an ancient, evil intelligence. "It's time to complete your transformation, Sarah," Jonathan hissed, his tongue now forked. "The masters are eager to receive you." As the creature advanced, its claws outstretched towards me, I knew that my life would never be the same. The horror had only just begun. I looked at my listeners, their faces pale in the flickering light of the fire. But what happened next? Well, that's a story for another chapter. The silence that followed my last account was dense, almost suffocating. The flames of the fire had dimmed to a faint glow, casting dancing shadows that seemed to take on a life of their own. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the memories I was about to unearth. "What happened in that room?" I began, my voice little more than a whisper. "Defies human comprehension. But I'll try to explain, because you deserve to know the truth. The terrible, unbelievable truth." I closed my eyes for a moment, reliving that horrible scene. Jonathan and the reptilian creature were advancing towards me. I was paralyzed, torn between absolute terror and a strange fascination. It was as if a part of me, a part I didn't recognize, was anxious about what was to come. "The process has already begun, Sarah," Jonathan hissed, his voice now a grotesque mixture of human and reptile. "Since that first night, the reptilian DNA has been intertwined with yours. You are the key, the perfect link between our species." As he spoke, I felt a sharp pain spreading through my body. I looked down at my hands and saw, horrified, that my skin was beginning to transform. Iridescent scales were sprouting in patches, spreading like an alien infection. I screamed, more from shock than pain, and tried to back away. But my movements were slow, clumsy. My body didn't respond as it should. The reptilian creature emitted a sound. I can't describe it properly. It was like a mixture of hissing and singing, vibrating at a frequency that reverberated in my bones. And, to my horror, I realized that I understood. They weren't words but concepts, images forming in my mind. I saw flashes of an ancient civilization, impossible constructions rising under alien skies. I saw reptilian beings sailing through space in organic ships, seeding life on distant planets. And I saw the Earth, young and primitive, being shaped by these creatures. "We are the creators," Jonathan's voice echoed in my mind, mingling with the creature's song. "We came before humanity, we guided its evolution, and now it's time to claim what's ours." I paused, observing the shocked faces around me. The wind had intensified, howling through the trees like a distant wail. I wanted to fight, I wanted to run away, but my body was surrendering to the transformation. I could feel my bones rearranging themselves, my muscles reconfiguring themselves. The pain was indescribable, but at the same time, there was a feeling of liberation. My vision changed, becoming sharper. The colors took on new dimensions that I can't describe with human words. And the sounds. I could hear the beating hearts of everyone in the room, the flow of blood in their veins. Jonathan approached, his reptilian eyes fixed on mine. "Don't fight it, Sarah. Embrace your true nature. You will be the bridge between two worlds, the herald of a new era." Part of me wanted to give in, wanted to surrender to that bizarre transformation. But another part, the part that still clung to my humanity, screamed in protest. It was then that I heard another sound, a sound that didn't belong in that reptilian nightmare. Sirens, distant, but fast approaching. Jonathan's face contorted into a mask of fury. "No," he roared. "We're so close." The reptilian creature emitted a deafening hiss, its shape beginning to distort and change. It was as if it was disappearing, merging with the shadows. Jonathan turned to me, his eyes now completely inhuman. "This isn't over, Sarah. You belong to us now. No matter where you go, no matter how much time passes, we'll find you." Before I could react, he grabbed my arm. I felt a sharp pain, and when I looked, I saw that he had driven some kind of device into my skin. It was small, almost imperceptible, glowing with a strange light before disappearing under my flesh. "A gift from the Masters," he hissed, "so that you'll never forget us." And then, in the blink of an eye, they were gone. Jonathan, the creature, even Ethan's mutated body, they all vanished like smoke. Moments later, the police stormed the scene. Apparently, my sudden disappearance had aroused suspicion, and someone had alerted the authorities about my trip back to the convent. They found me lying on the floor of the ritual room, trembling and mumbling incoherently. My body had returned to normal, or at least it seemed normal at first glance, but I could feel something moving under my skin, pulsing in sync with my racing heart. I paused, feeling the weight of the gazes fixed on me. The fire had dwindled to embers, casting a red glow over our faces. The years that followed were a nightmare of medical tests, endless interrogations, and intensive therapy. Nobody believed my story, of course. How could they? The doctors attributed my experience to a combination of post-traumatic stress and possible exposure to hallucinogenic drugs. But I knew the truth. I could feel it in every fiber of my being. The gift that Jonathan had implanted in me remained dormant, but always present. Sometimes, late at night, I swore I could feel something moving under my skin, as if it were waiting. And the changes continued. Subtle, almost imperceptible to others, but undeniable to me. My senses became sharper. My strength and agility increased, and sometimes, in moments of extreme stress, I could feel my skin begin to change. I spent years trying to understand what had happened to me, tirelessly researching reptilians, alien conspiracies, and secret genetic experiments. I found more questions than answers, more crazy theories than concrete facts. But one thing became clear: I wasn't alone. Others like me existed, people who had had similar encounters, who carried the same doom potential within them. We formed a secret network, sharing information, supporting each other, always vigilant, always hidden. Because we knew they were still out there, watching, waiting. Jonathan, the reptilians, the sect, they hadn't given up. The awakening they mentioned was still to come. I looked at the faces around me, seeing a mixture of fear, fascination, and disbelief. You may think this is just a horror story, a tale to scare around the campfire. Part of me would like it to be, but the truth is much more frightening. Because they're among us, hiding in plain sight. And one day they will surface. And when that happens, the world as we know it will cease to exist. I held out my arm, revealing a small, almost invisible scar. This is the constant reminder of what I am now, of what I can become. A bridge between two worlds, as Jonathan said. A threat, a savior. I don't know yet. But one thing is certain: the battle for humanity is just beginning, and each of you will have to choose a side. The silence that followed was deafening. The fire had been completely extinguished, leaving us in the darkness of night. And in that darkness, for a moment, I swore I saw reptilian eyes watching us from the shadows. The silence that followed my last revelation was palpable. The darkness around us seemed alive, pulsating with secrets and hidden threats. Slowly, someone rekindled the fire, and the flickering flames cast dancing shadows over pale, tense faces. "You must be wondering," I began, my voice hoarse from talking so much, "why I'm telling you all this now. Why, after years of silence and secrecy, I've decided to reveal the truth." I paused, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. The answer is simple and terrifying. The awakening is coming, and you need to be ready. A murmur of fear and confusion ran through the group. I raised my hand, asking for silence. In recent months, the signs have intensified. My contacts around the world report an increase in the sect's activities. Sightings of reptilian creatures have multiplied, and the device on my arm... I shuddered, remembering. It started pulsing, emitting a signal that only I can hear, a call. But the most alarming thing is the dreams. Every night, I'm haunted by visions of a bleak future, cities in ruins, skies darkened by alien ships, humanity enslaved by our reptilian creators. And at the center of it all, always, is Jonathan. He's changed. He's no longer the charismatic leader I knew all those years ago. Now, he's something more, something beyond human comprehension. In my dreams, he stands like a colossus, half man, half reptile, proclaiming the dawn of a new era. I looked at the faces around me, seeing the fear and disbelief in their eyes. I know what you're thinking, that I'm crazy, that it's all just the delirium of a traumatized mind. Part of me wishes it were. But the truth is much more frightening. Slowly, I began to remove my jacket. Remember when I talked about the changes in my body? Well, they've intensified over the last few days. And now, I let the jacket fall, revealing my arms. Under the wavering light of the fire, everyone could see patches of iridescent scales covering my skin, glowing with a supernatural light of their own. Gasps of shock and horror echoed around me. Some recoiled instinctively, others were paralyzed with fear. "This," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "is only the beginning. The reptilian DNA in me is becoming more and more dominant, and I'm not the only one. Others like me, scattered around the world, are going through the same transformation. Jonathan and the reptilian masters have been planning this for millennia. We hybrids are the first wave, destined to be the bridge between humans and reptilians, the heralds of a new world order." I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the internal struggle between my human side and the growing alien influence. "But there is hope," I continued, opening my eyes and looking at each person around the campfire. "Not all the hybrids are on Jonathan's side. many of us resisted, fought against the transformation. We formed a secret resistance, determined to prevent the awakening. That's why I'm here, to warn you, to prepare you, because the coming battle will not only be fought in the shadows, it will be a war for the very soul of humanity. At that moment, I felt a sharp pain in my arm. The device implanted by Jonathan was pulsing furiously, emitting a visible glow through my skin. "It's starting," I whispered, my body shaking with the intensity of the signal. The final call. In the distance, a shrill sound cut through the night air. It wasn't a siren or any noise produced by human technology. It was a hiss, amplified 1,000 times, reverberating through the atmosphere. The sky above us suddenly lit up, torn by lights that moved in impossible patterns. Huge objects, organic and alien in shape, began to materialize in the clouds. Screams of panic echoed around us. People ran in all directions, some falling to their knees in shock and despair. "Listen!" I shouted, my voice amplified by a force I didn't fully understand. "This isn't the end. This is the beginning of the fight. Each of you has a role to play." My whole body was shaking now, the transformation accelerating rapidly. I could feel my bones rearranging themselves, my muscles reconfiguring themselves. The pain was unbearable, but with it came an astonishing clarity. "Humanity has a choice to make," I continued, my voice changing, becoming a bizarre mixture of human and reptile. "Submit to the reptilian masters or fight for freedom, and you are the first to know the truth." With a supreme effort, I focused on the terrified faces in front of me. "Spread the word. Get ready. The resistance needs you, because the future depends on what we do now." A final spasm of pain shot through me, and I felt my consciousness expanding, connecting to something vast and incomprehensible. Visions of the past and the future flooded my mind, the true history of the Earth, the fate of humanity, the plans of the reptilian masters. "The awakening has come," I declared, my voice now completely transformed, and with it, the greatest battle humanity has ever faced. Above us, the alien ships began their descent, casting beams of light over the city. In the distance, explosions and screams could be heard. I took one last look at the group around the dying bonfire, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and wonder. "The choice is yours now," I said, feeling my body preparing for a final and irreversible change. "Fight, resist, hope still lives." And with those words, I surrendered to the transformation, my body dissolving into a mass of energy and light. Within seconds, there was nothing left where I had been, just the echo of my last words and the residual glow of iridescent scales. The group stood there, paralyzed between shock and comprehension of what they had witnessed. Around them, the world they knew was crumbling, giving way to a terrifying new reality. The awakening had begun, and with it, the fate of humanity hung by a thread. In the skies, reptilian ships blocked out the stars, their alien outlines an ominous promise of what was to come. And somewhere, in the spaces between dimensions, Jonathan smiled, his reptilian eyes shining with the anticipation of imminent victory. But the seed of resistance had been planted, the truth had been revealed. And as long as there were those willing to fight, the battle for Earth and for the very essence of humanity would continue. The end was only the beginning.